There is a place that sits 1,000 years past the end of the world. The sky above it is a warm, hazy shade of green. Purple mountains rise in the distance, dotted with creatures that should not exist, candy-coated people wandering the streets of sugar castles, rainicorns trailing ribbons of color through clouds the color of sherbet, ancient undead kings muttering to themselves inside glaciers the size of small cities. Enormous rock formations, shaped like the hands of giants, jut out of hillsides. Lumpy people float gently through the air in their own dimension, phasing into and out of reality at random intervals. There is a giant sea creature moving slowly in the waters to the south, old enough to have watched entire civilizations rise and fall on its back. It looks on the surface like a cartoon dream, a bright, cheerful, improbable thing. The kind of place a child might draw when asked to invent somewhere wonderful. But underneath all of it, buried under the cotton candy and the talking dogs and the mathematical exclamations of a 14-year-old boy in a white hat, there is something else entirely. Something that breathes slow and cold and deep. A history stretching back through time into something that feels almost unbearably real. The ruins of skyscrapers bent like broken teeth. A crater where a city used to be. A crown that has been slowly eating a man's soul for 1,000 years. A child sitting alone in the rubble of the world, clutching a stuffed bear and waiting for someone who will never fully come back to her. Adventure Time is, on paper, a cartoon for children that premiered on Cartoon Network on April 5th, 2010. But what it actually turned out to be, what it slowly and carefully revealed itself to be over the course of 10 seasons and 283 episodes, was something much stranger and much sadder and much more beautiful than the words cartoon for children could ever come close to containing. Tonight, we are going to go through all of it. The creation of the show from a 7-minute short made by a man fresh out of art school who had never run a television series before. The real history of the Land of Ooo and what it says about the world we actually live in. The heartbreaking truth behind every major character and what their stories mean when you trace them all the way back to their beginnings. The cosmic mythology that stretches from the age of the dinosaurs to the heat death of the universe. The hidden details, the behind-the-scenes stories, the facts that casual viewers missed, and that deep lore fans still find themselves thinking about at 3 in the morning when they cannot sleep. Get comfortable. Let the screen go soft at the edges. This is going to take a while, and that is absolutely fine. If you are watching this from your bed or your couch right now, drop a comment and let me know what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you are sitting. There is something genuinely wonderful about knowing people from different corners of the planet are all settling in at the same time for the same story. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. It genuinely helps more than you know, and it means that the next time a video like this is ready, it finds you when you need it. Now, let us begin at the beginning. Not at the beginning of the show, at the beginning of everything. Part 1. What the Land of Ooo really is. Most people who watched the early episodes of Adventure Time understood the basic premise quickly enough. Boy and his magical dog go on adventures in a weird, colorful fantasy kingdom. There are princesses and monsters and dungeons, and a villain who kidnaps people. Fine. Clear. Easy to follow. The show presents itself with such cheerful confidence in its own strangeness that it is entirely possible to watch the first several episodes and simply enjoy the ride without asking too many questions about how any of it got here. But something odd starts creeping in almost immediately if you pay any real attention to the background details. In the very opening sequence of the show, the camera pans across the Land of Ooo in a slow, sweeping establishing shot that sets the scene for every episode. And if you know what you are looking for, you can see it clearly in the first few seconds. Tucked in among the rolling hills and the candy trees and the cheerful monsters is something that does not belong in a fairy tale. The rusted hulk of a nuclear missile, half buried in the earth. The crumbling shell of what used to be a building, the kind made from concrete and glass in the way that only the modern world builds things. A submarine sitting in the grass, miles from any ocean. A tank so old that flowers have grown through its treads and moss covers its turret, patient and green, consumed by the landscape it was once designed to conquer. These things are not decorative, they are not Easter eggs placed for the amusement of close-reading adults. They are a message delivered quietly and consistently from the show's very first moment to anyone paying close enough attention to receive it. The land of Oo is not a fantasy kingdom. It is Earth, our Earth, 1,000 years from now after something went very, very wrong. The show calls this catastrophic event the Mushroom War, and deliberately, meticulously, it never fully explains what it was, or who started it, or exactly when it happened. The deliberate vagueness is a choice made with care. It mirrors the way real societies remember, and more often partially forget, the catastrophes of their pasts. 1,000 years is enough time for the specific details to blur into legend, to become something referenced in hushed tones without being fully explained, to exist as a heavy presence in the cultural background without being available as a complete historical record. The young people of Oo know the Mushroom War, the way we know ancient disasters, as something that happened, that explains the shape of things, but whose texture and specific horror have been softened by the distance of time. What the show does give you, scattered across years of episodes in fragments and glimpses and throwaway lines of dialogue, is enough to piece together a picture if you are willing to do the work. The Mushroom War was a global nuclear conflict, not a regional war or a limited nuclear exchange, but a total, civilization-ending event. A third world war that ended with the detonation of at least one weapon, unlike anything in recorded human history. The show's mythology describes it as ending with an all-out nuclear exchange and a specific mutagenic bomb being dropped on what was once North America. The mutagenic quality of that specific bomb is the detail that changed everything, because that bomb did not just kill what it touched. It altered the rules of reality in the land where it fell. It broke something fundamental in the relationship between matter and magic that had governed the world since human civilization rose. The evidence of the war's scope is everywhere if you look for it. There are remnants of military hardware all across the landscape of Oo, vehicles and aircraft and weapons abandoned in mid-deployment, as though the people operating them simply ceased to exist between one moment and the next. In the episode Mortal Folly, the base of the Lich's power is a ruined subway station deep underground, its platforms scattered with human skeletons bundled up in winter clothing, sitting in their seats and lying across the floors in the exact positions they occupied when the bomb went off above them. Character designer Andy Restaino confirmed in behind-the-scenes materials that these were deliberately intended to feel like East Coast commuters, ordinary people on their way to work on a cold day, stopped mid-commute in the middle of an ordinary morning, and never going home. The bomb detonated somewhere in what had been the northeastern United States. The crater it left is visible from orbit in the show's geography, a vast wound in the North American continent that has never fully healed, even 1,000 years later. The subway and its platforms, deliberately designed to recall New York or New Jersey transit infrastructure, sit in the shadow of that wound. The Candy Kingdom rose on what the geography suggests was once the northeastern seaboard, built on top of what the bomb's aftermath had transformed. In the centuries following the war, the rules of the world changed in ways that have no parallel in recorded human experience. The radiation and the mutagenic energy released by the weapon, combined with something older, the ambient magic that had been slowly fading from the world for millennia, pushed out gradually by the rational structures of technology and organized civilization. And the combination of those two things produced the land of Oo. Animals developed intelligence and language. Plants grew faces and personalities. Ordinary matter began responding to emotional states and personal desires in ways that defied scientific explanation. The four classical elements of the Adventure Time universe, candy, fire, ice, and slime, express themselves through living avatars called elementals, taking on their most fully realized forms in a world where magic had flooded back into every available space. The magic that returned to Oo in the wake of the Mushroom War is something that the show treats as genuinely ancient, not created by the bomb, but released by it, the way that a seal on a container releases what was always inside when it breaks. Magic in this mythology predates human civilization by millions of years, active and powerful in the deep past of the world, gradually crowded out by the structures of rational civilization, waiting behind the thin wall that those structures maintained. The bomb shattered the wall. The magic came back. This is one of Adventure Time's most quietly poetic ideas, that the return of wonder to the world was not a gift, but a consequence. The enchanted landscape of Oo, genuinely beautiful as it is, emerged from an act of comprehensive destruction. Every piece of magic and strangeness and wonder in the land of Oo stands in the shadow of an apocalypse. Every rainbow-colored creature in Candy Castle and Talking Mountain is a child of the bomb, in the specific sense that it would not exist if the bomb had not fallen. And knowing that, holding both the wonder and its origin at once, does not diminish the wonder. It makes it more specific, more earned, more real in the way that things which have survived something terrible are more real than things that have simply always been comfortable. When Princess Bubblegum worries about the stability of her kingdom, she is not just a fairy tale queen managing her subjects. She is the custodian of a fragile pocket of civilization that rose from the ashes of something that burned every other civilization in the world to the ground. She carries the weight of being the most advanced society standing, in a landscape where the most advanced society that ever existed destroyed itself. Her sometimes paranoid protectiveness of the Candy Kingdom, her surveillance systems, her contingency plans, her tendency to make unilateral decisions in the name of stability, makes sense not as simple authoritarian instinct, but as the behavior of someone who has thought very carefully about what happens when things collapse, and who is determined to prevent it from happening again on her watch. When the Lich exists as a walking embodiment of death and destruction, he is not just a standard fantasy villain with the usual motivations. He is, in a very literal sense, the spirit of the bomb itself, a consciousness born from the act of mass extermination, still pursuing in his ancient undead form the goal that the weapon was built to accomplish. The bomb wanted to end life. The Lich is that wanting, given a face and a voice in 1,000 years of patient, purposeful effort. The timeline of the Mushroom War was never fully specified in canon, but the breadcrumbs the show leaves behind suggest it happened somewhere between the late 20th century and the early 21st. Recent enough that some characters who lived through it are still walking around when the main story takes place, preserved by magic or supernatural nature against the normal passage of time. Marceline the Vampire Queen was approximately 7 years old when it happened. Simon Petrikov, the man who would become the Ice King, was a young adult, a scholar and antiquarian who had recently made a discovery in Scandinavia that would permanently and catastrophically alter the course of his existence. Before the bomb, this world looked like ours. The show depicts it in flashbacks with the careful mundanity of someone who wants you to recognize it. There are apartment buildings and parking lots and television sets and cassette tapes. There are universities and archaeological journals and dockside markets. There are people who fall in love and make plans and record themselves on video cameras because they are afraid they will forget something important. It is recognizable. It is And then the bomb fell and the green light spread, and the world that was ended and the world that would replace it began. The show's Season 8 episode depicting Princess Bubblegum's population statistics from before and after the Mushroom War implies that the vast majority of humanity was either killed outright or mutated beyond recognition in the generations immediately following the war. Finn the human is the last of his kind, or appears to be for most of the series, not because of some fantasy curse or magical circumstance, but because a nuclear war killed everyone else. This is a genuinely extraordinary piece of storytelling to carry in the background of a children's adventure cartoon. The hero's defining characteristic, his humanness, the thing that makes him legible to the audience watching at home, exists because of an apocalypse. He is the rarest thing in Oo, not because of destiny, but because of disaster. The land of Oo is beautiful. Genuinely, improbably, extravagantly beautiful. It has a sweetness to it that is real, not ironic. The Candy People are real people with real feelings. The Rainicorns leave actual color in the sky when they move. The sunset over a purple mountain is something to look at. The world that grew up from the ruins of the Old One found ways to be astonishing, that the Old One, for all its sophistication, never quite managed. It is also, underneath that beauty, a graveyard. The bones of the old world are everywhere once you know to look for them. And somehow knowing that, sitting with the double awareness of the wonder and the sorrow that generated it, the land of Oo becomes more beautiful still. Not despite the darkness, because of how much light grew out of it anyway. Part 2. Pendleton Ward and the Birth of Adventure Time. Before there was a land of ooh, there was a young man named Pendleton Ward sitting at a desk with a sketchbook, drawing a weird little boy and his dog. Pendleton Ward was born on July 8, 1982 in San Antonio, Texas. He grew up interested in animation from an early age, inspired partly by his mother, who was herself a visual artist with connections to people who worked in animation. Ward has described being the kind of child who was always drawing, filling notebooks, making flip books in the margins of school papers, inventing worlds on the backs of things that were supposed to be about other subjects. The impulse to create was not something he developed deliberately. It was simply what his hands did when they were free. By the time he was a student at the California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, he was developing the visual language and the philosophical sensibility and the specific, particular brand of emotional honesty that would eventually make Adventure Time the show it became. CalArts is worth pausing on for a moment because the culture of that institution is genuinely significant to understanding where Adventure Time came from and why it looks and feels the way it does. CalArts is a private arts university in Valencia, California, with an extraordinary legacy in American animation. The list of notable alumni reads like a catalog of the people who shaped what American cartoons looked and felt like from the 1990s onward. Steven Hillenburg, who created SpongeBob SquarePants. Genndy Tartakovsky, who gave the world Dexter's Laboratory and Samurai Jack. John Lasseter. Tim Burton. The founders of studios and the creators of shows that defined a generation of animated television. What CalArts produces, more than any specific technique, is people who understand animation as an art form rather than purely as a commercial product. People who have the craft and the conceptual framework to access the full expressive potential of what a drawn moving image can do. The mark of this training is visible throughout Adventure Time, in the looseness and expressiveness of the character designs, which can stretch and distort and convey extraordinary emotional range while remaining internally coherent. In the thoughtfulness of the backgrounds, painted with a richness that carries narrative information, the foreground action does not address directly. In the willingness to let silence do work, to let a moment breathe, to trust that the image without dialogue can carry as much weight as the image with it. After graduating, Ward was contacted by Eric Homan, the vice president of development at Frederator Studios, who had seen one of Ward's short films at a CalArts screening event for animators called The Producers Show. The event was an annual showcase at which students presented work to potential employers, and Homan saw something in Ward's film, a quality of genuine invention, a sense of humor that was both irreverent and warm, a world that felt like it had come from somewhere real in its creator, that made him reach out. He told Ward he should think about pitching an idea to Frederator. Ward had an idea already developing, a boy in a white hat and a magical dog and a world full of strange adventures. He brought it to Frederator as a 7-minute short for a programming block called Random Cartoons, which aired on what was then the Nicktoons network. The block was designed by Fred Seibert to let animators pitch and produce short works that could potentially become full series, an animation incubator essentially, for ideas that might not find their way through the standard development channels. The short was called Adventure Time. The main character was not called Finn. He was called Pen, Pendleton Ward's own nickname, and he was voiced by Zach Shada, older brother of Jeremy Shada, who would eventually voice Finn in the full series. Jake the Dog was already Jake the Dog, already voiced by John DiMaggio, who was already Bender on Futurama. The original short had all the essential DNA of the series that would follow: the energy, the physical comedy, the emotional generosity, the world that felt like a fairy tale on top of something considerably older and stranger. The short aired on January 11th, 2007. Something unexpected happened. It connected with people in a way that went well beyond the usual trajectory of a promotional animated short. The clip circulated widely across early internet platforms and fan communities and forums, passed from person to person by people who could not quite articulate what they loved about it, but knew with certainty that they wanted everyone else to see it. It won an Annie Award for Best Animated Short Subject, covering a period from 2009 to 2014, reflecting the sustained attention it continued to generate. Nickelodeon had been offered the series first when Ward initially pitched off with the concept. They passed. The reasons were never fully stated publicly, but the spirit of the thing, Its particular brand of irreverence, its cheerful disregard for the guardrails that children's television typically operated within, its emotional sincerity mixed with genuine absurdism, probably did not fit cleanly into the programming frameworks that Nickelodeon was working with at the time. Cartoon Network was where it found its home. With substantial help from Patrick McHale, who would later create Over the Garden Wall, widely considered one of the finest animated series ever made, and Adam Muto, who would eventually become the showrunner for Adventure Time's final 5 seasons, Ward pitched the series to Cartoon Network using an early storyboard for an episode called The Enchiridion. The pitch demonstrated that the premise of the short could support a full series while maintaining the qualities always that had made it work in the first place. The physical expressiveness, the humor that existed at multiple registers simultaneously, the emotional generosity that made characters feel like people rather than types. Cartoon Network greenlit the first season in September 2008. The target premiere was Christmas 2009, a deadline that slipped as production developed. Slumber Party Panic aired on April 5, 2010. As the official series premiere, though The Enchiridion was the first episode actually produced. The show ran for 10 seasons and 283 episodes, concluding on September 3, 2018. It spawned 4 HBO Max Distant Lands specials, released from 2020 to 2021, and the full spin-off Adventure Time, Fiona and Cake, which premiered in 2023. The franchise that grew from a 7-minute short about a boy and his dog became one of the most extensive and internally coherent fictional universes in the history of American animation. The writer's room that Ward assembled for the early seasons of Adventure Time reads, in retrospect, like one of the most remarkable creative ensembles in television history, though it was not necessarily recognized as such at the time. Rebecca Sugar, who would go on to create Steven Universe, was a writer and storyboard artist for the first 5 seasons. Patrick McHale was a writer and producer before leaving to develop Over the Garden Wall. Kent Osborne contributed to some of the show's most memorable episodes. Adam Muto was present from nearly the beginning, learning the show's rhythms and priorities over years of close work before eventually taking over its stewardship from Ward. The show's visual philosophy was something Ward articulated clearly in early interviews and development materials. He wanted the world to feel hand-drawn in a genuine sense, not polished to a smooth corporate finish, but expressive and slightly imperfect in the way that drawings made by someone who cares about what they are making tend to be. The character designs are deliberately simple, built on basic geometric shapes, in a way that gives them enormous expressive range. Finn's design, a white oval face, a white hat, a blue shirt, as basic as any character design can be, can convey an extraordinary range of emotional states precisely because the simplicity leaves everything to the expression. There is nothing decorative getting in the way of the feeling. The backgrounds are a different matter. They are richly detailed, painted in warm, slightly desaturated colors that give the world of Ooh a specific visual quality, something between a children's picture book and a waking dream. Not quite realistic, but not quite cartoonish either. The backgrounds carry the world's history in them. The ancient stones and the ruined arches and the vine-covered remnants of pre-war construction are painted with a care that says, this world has a past. It has layers. Look closer and there will be more. The voice cast assembled for the series became one of its great sustained achievements, and the specific casting decisions had consequences that extended well beyond the usual considerations of quality and fit. Jeremy Shada, who voiced Finn, was himself approximately 12 years old when the series premiered. As Finn aged across the show's 10 seasons, growing from a child to a young man, from an impulsive boy to someone who had earned his thoughtfulness, Shada's real voice aged alongside him. The slight but perceptible deepening of his voice between Season 1 and Season 10 is not just an incidental biological fact. In the context of a show about a boy growing up, it is one of the most organic pieces of character development in television history. The character and the actor grow together in perfect, if entirely accidental, synchronization. John DiMaggio's Jake brought warmth and physical generosity and genuine goofiness to a character who could easily have been reduced to comic relief. Tom Kenny, who voices SpongeBob SquarePants and a remarkable number of other animated characters, took the Ice King and found in him something that managed to be both genuinely funny and genuinely heartbreaking. sometimes in the same sentence through a precision of vocal characterization that holds up under close examination. Hynden Walsh voiced Princess Bubblegum with a quality of composed authority that made the moments when the composure cracked feel like genuine events. And Olivia Olson voiced Marceline with a coolness that concealed extraordinary vulnerability, delivering the character's songs with the commitment of someone who understood that this was the primary language in which Marceline told the truth. The show that these people built, starting from a short about a kid and his dog having adventures, turned out to be one of the most carefully considered and genuinely affecting animated series in television history. That this was not immediately obvious, that it required several seasons to reveal its full depth, was part of the design. The show trusted its audience to grow with it, and the audience did. Part 3. Simon Petrikov and the Crown That Ate His Soul. Let's slow down here. Let's stay with this one for a while because it deserves the time. Before the Ice King was the Ice King, he was a man named Simon Petrikov. And the story of what happened to Simon Petrikov is, without exaggeration, one of the most genuinely heartbreaking character arcs in the history of animated television. Not because it is designed to manipulate, though it does move you, but because it is built with such structural care and such respect for the audience's intelligence that by the time you feel the full weight of it, you have been brought there honestly. Every piece of the tragedy lands exactly as hard as it should, no more and no less, because the show took years building the foundation before it asked you to stand on it. Simon was a scholar, an antiquarian, someone who studied and collected ancient artifacts with a particular interest in the history of the mysterious and the poorly understood. A newspaper clipping visible in a later episode identifies him as a professor of archaeology. He wore thick-framed glasses. He had the slightly rumpled, forward-leaning energy of someone who became an academic because they genuinely loved the material rather than because they were chasing prestige or security. He was in love with a woman named Betty Groff, a scientist herself, whose specific field is never given but whose intelligence and rigor are apparent in every flashback appearance the show allows her. He called her Princess, a term of endearment, personal and private, the kind of nickname that exists between two specific people and belongs to no one else. At some point in the years before the Mushroom War, possibly in the late 1980s or 1990s, based on the aesthetic details of the show's pre-war glimpses, Simon purchased a crown from an old dock worker in northern Scandinavia. He had been traveling for work, following a lead on an artifact of potential historical interest. The crown was golden, topped with 3 points, set with 3 red rubies. Old in the specific way that objects look old when they genuinely are, with the kind of craftwork that implies it was made for something that mattered. He brought it home. He wanted to show Betty. He put it on to make her laugh. What followed was the beginning of the end of Simon Petrikov's life as he knew it, though he would not understand the full shape of what was ending for some time afterward. The crown seized control of him immediately upon contact. He went somewhere else, a place he could not remember when he came back to himself. And in that space, the crown's ancient magic expressed itself through his body with no regard for what Simon wanted. He blasted ice through the apartment. He chased Betty through the streets, calling out for his princess in a voice that was recognizably his but freighted with something that was not. When the episode passed and Simon returned to himself, standing somewhere he did not recognize, Betty was gone. She left him. Whatever she had witnessed during the crown's control, whatever had been done and said, had been enough to drive her away. Simon had no memory of it. He could not apologize specifically, could not explain specifically, because he genuinely did not know what he had done. He made VHS recordings of himself in the apartment after she left, talking to the camera with the urgency of someone who understood that their own memory could not be trusted. He documented the changes in his body, the blue skin creeping in, the elongating nose, the whitening of hair and eyes, the temperature of his skin dropping below normal human range. He documented the voices he was hearing even without wearing the crown, because the exposure had already established something that could not be undone by simply putting the object down. He described his fear with the precision of someone who was trying to leave a record for a version of himself who would not be there to remember having been afraid. He said at some point in those recordings, that he was afraid that when the madness finally took him completely, there would be no one left who could save him. He was right to be afraid, and he was also, it would turn out, wrong. The origin of the crown is one of the most precisely constructed pieces of the show's mythology, delivered in a season 6 episode called Evergreen, that takes place 65 million years in the past. In the Mesozoic era, the age of the dinosaurs, an ice elemental wizard named Urgence Evergreen was confronting a catastrophe. A catalyst comet, one of the periodic cosmic events in the Adventure Time universe's mythology, was approaching Earth, and Evergreen had determined it to be a destructive one. He built the crown as a solution, a device that would grant its first wearer their deepest wish. His intention was to wear it himself and wish the comet deflected. Before he could do this, his young assistant, named Gunter, which is the same name that the Ice King gives to all of his penguins in the present-day storyline, a detail that works as either a strange coincidence or the crown's memory bleeding into the Ice King's unconscious speech patterns, put the crown on first. The crown read Gunter's deepest wish, to be like Urgence Evergreen, his idol and teacher. The crown tried to grant that wish and produced a blasting, ice-throwing, incoherent parody of the wizard rather than anything that could address the incoming comet. The comet struck. The dinosaurs died. Everything changed. The crown survived 65 million years of Earth's subsequent history because ancient magical objects built by elemental wizards to redirect cosmic catastrophe tend to be built with significant durability. Over those millions of years, it passed through various hands, each time trying to grant the wearer's deepest wish, and each time producing a warped, literal interpretation of that wish that served the crown's magical mechanics but rarely served the person who wore it. By the time Simon Petrikov found it in a Scandinavian second-hand market, it had been doing this for 65 million years. It was very good at the process. The process had never, in all that time, produced anything that could be honestly described as benevolent. Simon kept wearing the crown after that first catastrophic episode with Betty because he needed it. The Mushroom War was coming or had already begun, and the world outside was becoming actively hostile to survival. The crown gave him real power, the ability to generate and manipulate ice to drive away the monsters that increasingly filled the post-war landscape, to protect the people around him in the immediate physical sense. He was paying for this with his mind, and he knew it. And he kept paying it because the alternative was to be powerless in a world that was killing people who lacked power. The crown was slowly transforming him. The blue skin, the elongated nose, the whitening of eyes and hair. The voices. The periods of blackout during which the crown operated him like a puppet, pursuing its ancient, broken interpretation of his deepest wish. Finding his princess, the one he called by that name, the one who had left. These periods grew longer, and the intervals of genuine lucidity grew shorter. Simon documented all of it on the VHS tapes, knowing the documentation was what stood between his story being known and it disappearing completely when the madness took his memories. In the ruins of the post-war world, partially transformed, unstable, dangerous to himself and to the people around him, Simon Petrikov found a child. She was sitting alone in the wreckage of what had been a city. She was 7 years old. She was clutching a stuffed toy. She was not crying, which is how you can tell she had been in the ruined world long enough to have adapted to it. The specific calm of a child who has no older version of the world to measure the current one against. The world was ruined. The world had always been ruined. Simon stopped. He had every practical reason to keep moving. The world was ending, in the slow and ongoing sense that the world had already ended and was continuing to end in the years following the initial catastrophe. Every resource was scarce. Every moment spent on anything other than survival was a risk. And Simon Petrikov, who was losing his mind to an ancient magical artifact that wanted him to go find a princess, looked at this child and chose to take responsibility for her. He kept her fed, finding food in the ruins of shops and storage facilities and whatever structures were still standing. He found them shelter, moving through the devastated urban landscape and locating places that were stable enough to sleep in. He drove away the monsters, the green, shambling, mutagenic creatures that roamed the streets in the aftermath of the bomb, the mutated remnants of what had been ordinary animals and possibly ordinary people, using the crown's ice powers. knowing every use cost him something he could not get back. He sang songs for her. He told her stories. He found her a stuffed doll, a rag doll that she named Hambo, because she was a child and children need things to hold. The episode Simon and Marcy is widely considered one of the finest single episodes the show ever produced. And watching it with full knowledge of everything the show eventually reveals about both characters gives it an emotional resonance that even the first viewing, however affecting, cannot fully provide. You are watching the last extended period of Simon Petrikov's genuine lucidity. You are watching a man spend it taking care of a child he has no obligation to, using a power that costs him more of himself with every application, and choosing to do it anyway because there is a small person who needs someone to. In one scene, he finds a cassette tape, the recording of a television program's theme song, something cheerful and utterly mundane in the context of the civilization that produced it, and plays it for Marceline on a cassette player he finds in the wreckage. It is warm and familiar, and completely out of place in the landscape they are living in. They laugh together. For a few minutes in the middle of the end of the world, two people are just enjoying a silly song together. The show holds this moment with extraordinary care, does not rush it, does not undercut it with anything dramatic. It just lets it be what it is, genuine small happiness in the worst possible circumstances. The kind of moment that gets carried for the rest of a life because it was the one that proved life was worth carrying. Simon eventually left. He made the decision before the crown made it for him. Left Marceline to protect her from what he was becoming, rather than staying until the crown had taken enough of him that he could not make the choice at all. He recorded himself explaining this in a note she was too young at the time to read, in the deteriorating voice of a man who was losing his own language to the thing that was consuming his identity. He gave her Hambo, the doll. He left. The crown took the rest. What remained was the Ice King, a cartoonish, blustering, harmless-seeming figure who kidnapped princesses and was regularly defeated by a 14-year-old boy who lived alone in a glacier with a population of penguins he called Gunter, who had absolutely no memory of having been one of the finest and most genuinely kind people the pre-war world had produced. He does not remember Betty. He does not remember Simon. He does not remember Marceline. When she eventually sings him the words from his own old journals, "I remember you," and "Please don't forget me," he listens as though they are a pleasant song by a stranger, moved by them in some way he cannot explain, unable to understand why they feel important. Tom Kenny plays all of this, the bluster and the sadness and the loneliness and the occasional, terrible dignity, with exactly the right precision. The character's cartoonish villainy sits on top of something genuinely mournful, and Kenny knows where both layers are at all times. In the early episodes, before the backstory has been revealed, you can hear it if you are listening for it, a quality of genuine confusion when people are frightened of him, as though the Ice King truly cannot understand why the thing he is trying to do, which is to connect with someone, keep producing such consistently terrible results. In retrospect, it is Simon underneath. The echo of a kind man trying to surface through 1,000 years of accumulated ice. The crown's connection to the broader cosmic mythology of the show becomes increasingly significant as the series develops. The catalyst comets, periodic transformative events, carrying different kinds of change, appear repeatedly in the mythology, connecting Simon's story to Finn's story and to the Lich's story, and to the deep past of the world in a way that makes the crown feel like a thread running through the entire history of the universe rather than simply a plot device. The resolution of Simon Petrikov's story is one of the most earned and genuinely moving things the show achieves, and we will reach it properly when we arrive at the finale. But it is worth noting here, at the end of the chapter about who he was before the crown changed him, the show gave Simon Petrikov something that very few characters in any medium ever receive. It gave him back to himself, not cleanly, not without cost, not with everything restored, but genuinely and permanently. The man in the VHS tapes, who said he was afraid no one would be able to save him, was wrong about one thing. Someone saved him. It just took everything she had to do it. Part 4. Marceline Abadir, 1,000 Years of Loneliness. Marceline the Vampire Queen is, for a substantial portion of the Adventure Time audience, the most interesting character the show created. This is a defensible position and not simply a matter of fandom preference. Her story covers more time, more emotional territory, and more genuinely complex philosophical ground than any other character arc in the series. By the time everything is over, she has existed for over 1,000 years. She has survived things that would destroy most people. She has lost things that cannot be replaced and kept finding reasons to continue anyway, carrying a bass guitar made from her family's battle axe and wearing clothes that suggest she settled her aesthetic preferences sometime in the early 1980s and saw no compelling reason to revise them since. Marceline Abadir was born as a human-demon hybrid. Her father, Hunson Abadir, is the Lord of Evil, the ruler of a hellish dimension called the Nightosphere, a primordial demon entity who has existed since before the current age of the universe, and who spends most of his time consuming souls when he is not being contained in his own realm. Her mother, Elise, whose name and appearance were confirmed in the distant land's special obsidian, was a human woman. Elise was voiced in the show by Rebecca Sugar, the creator of Steven Universe, and the casting feels entirely appropriate. Sugar's own creative work has consistently engaged with questions of inheritance and healing, and the ways that art functions as a form of emotional survival, themes that run directly through Marceline's entire arc. The warmth and gentleness Sugar brings to Elise's brief appearances give the character a fullness that arrives quickly and lingers after she is gone. Marceline was approximately 7 years old when the Mushroom War happened. A flashback in Memory of a Memory shows a young Marceline playing alone in the smoldering ruins of a city, surrounded by fire and debris, unafraid in the specific way of children who have never known anything other than what they are living in. She had no older version of the world to miss. The ruin was simply the world. It was warm, and she was alive in it, and that was what existence felt like. Her mother, Elise, traveled with her through the post-war landscape for a period after the war, keeping them both alive in a world that had become deeply hostile to fully human survival. But Elise was human, and the post-war world offered humans a limited set of futures. She eventually fell ill. The show does not specify how, because the world they were living in had so many ways to end a person, that the specifics are almost beside the point. Elise died, and Marceline was left alone, very young, half demon and half human, and entirely without anyone. And then Simon found her. He stopped when he did not have to stop, took responsibility for a child he had never met, and spent what remained of his lucid self keeping her fed and sheltered and emotionally intact in the ruins of the world. The episode Simon and Marcy is widely regarded as one of the finest single episodes the show ever produced, and watching it with full knowledge of everything the show eventually reveals about both characters gives it an emotional resonance that even the first viewing cannot fully provide. You are watching the last extended period of Simon Petrikoff's genuine self. You are watching a man use a cursed artifact to drive away monsters, knowing every use costs him something he cannot recover, choosing to do it anyway because there is a child who needs him to. Simon gave Marceline a stuffed doll. She named it Hambo. She kept it for 1,000 years, through vampire war and centuries of wandering and long stretches of solitude, and the kind of loss that rewrites everything it touches. And the doll became her most important physical connection to the period of her life when she had been loved unconditionally by someone who stayed for reasons other than obligation. When a wizard named Ash, a controlling and ultimately destructive relationship she entered into sometime during the centuries after Simon left, sold Hambo to a witch in exchange for a spell, the loss hit with a force that had nothing to do with the object's physical properties. Hambo was the thread connecting present Marceline to the version of herself that had been safe enough to laugh at a silly song in the ruins of everything. Losing it was losing access to that version of herself. She got it back eventually, through complications involving Prismo's time room. The show treated the recovery as significant rather than as plot color, which tells you how seriously it took the emotional logic of its characters. After Simon left, Marceline tried to reconnect with her father. She brought Hunson Abadir fries, French fries, a comfort food, the kind of gesture that says, "I wanted to share something nice with you." Hunson ate the fries. He did not notice they had been brought with intention. He did not register that the gesture meant something. He just ate them because he was hungry without being present enough in his relationship with his daughter to understand what she was offering. Marceline wrote a song about it. The Fry song is composed entirely out of grief and anger about a parent who kept failing to notice her, expressed in lyrics that are also somehow funny because that is Marceline's specific gift and survival mechanism. The ability to hold pain and humor simultaneously without letting either falsify the other. The song makes you laugh and breaks your heart at the same time, which is exactly what it should do. Hunson Abadir is not a simple villain. He is a primordial demon who has never had to think carefully about what other people need from him, because the category of other people needing things has always been secondary to his own nature. He loves Marceline in the abstract. He is consistently, specifically terrible at expressing or acting on that love in ways that would mean anything to her. The show gives him some moments of genuine effort in the later seasons, moments where he visibly tries, without pretending that those moments erase the long history of absence. He is trying, he is bad at it. Both things are true simultaneously. At some point during the centuries between the Mushroom War and the main series, Marceline became a vampire. The full story is the subject of the Season 7 miniseries Stakes, which is one of the most emotionally precise sections of the entire show. Before she became a vampire, Marceline used her demon powers, her supernatural strength, her shape-shifting, her resilience against things that killed ordinary people to hunt vampires. She was protecting the small, scattered communities of humans and semi-humans trying to rebuild in the post-war landscape. She was very good at this. She also discovered through the practice of it that every vampire she killed transferred a portion of its power to her, each kill adding a new ability to her existing arsenal. She gained flight, telekinesis, the ability to transform into a cloud of bats. She built an arsenal from the work itself. The last vampire she faced was the Vampire King, the lord of the remaining vampire population, the most powerful of the ones she had been hunting. Their fight was brutal and close and genuinely dangerous, and Marceline killed him. In the same instant, she was bitten. His essence transferred into her with his power. She became what she had spent years destroying in the act of completing the destruction. The irony is perfect and terrible. She dedicated herself to protecting people from vampires, completed that work, and the completion transformed her into the thing she had protected them from. Marceline adjusted. She adapted. She kept going. Adjusting and adapting is the specific skill set that 1,000 years of loss develops in a person, and Marceline has had 1,000 years to develop it. She feeds on the color red rather than blood. The show presents this as a consequence of her demon heritage, meaning she absorbs red from her environment rather than specifically requiring blood. Lighter shades of red and pink are acceptable substitutes. In the extended absence of red things, a more feral, instinctive state takes over. It is one of many small, carefully considered details about her that feel like they were developed by people genuinely interested in what it would actually be like to exist as Marceline, rather than borrowed wholesale from standard vampire mythology. The bass guitar made from the battle axe is her defining object. She took a weapon, a thing designed to harm, and turned it into an instrument, a thing designed to create. She has been playing it for centuries, writing songs about everything that has hurt her, and the music has been both survival mechanism and primary truth-telling mode. Adventure Time's world does not allow Marceline to simply explain herself. She is too old and too complicated and too self-protective for straight explanation. But when she plays music, she tells the truth, and the people who listen carefully enough hear it. Her relationship with Princess Bubblegum is the show's central romance, developed across years of oblique approaches and half-revealed history before being confirmed in the series finale and explored explicitly in the Distant Lands Obsidian special. The two characters have a shared history predating the main series by centuries. They knew each other long before Finn and Jake arrived, and every scene they share carries the warmth and the complicated tension of that history. The falling out between them, addressed directly in Obsidian, was rooted in the specific way that a person who has been hurt too many times can push away the people who actually stay. Marceline needed something from Bubblegum that Bubblegum was not yet ready to give. Bubblegum needed something from Marceline that Marceline's self-protective instincts made difficult to offer. They hurt each other in the slow, specific ways that people hurt the people they love, and then spent centuries not quite addressing it, and then eventually did. The series finale's on-screen kiss generated reactions in viewing spaces that testified to how much it had come to mean. It was earned. Olivia Olson's performance as Marceline is one of the finest sustained vocal characterizations in animated television. Cool and deeply vulnerable, irreverent and achingly sincere, capable of moving between those registers within a single line. When Marceline sings, Olson delivers the songs with the commitment of someone who understands that this is the moment when the character is most fully herself. Marceline is 1,000 years old, half demon, still carrying the weight of every person she has lost and every relationship she has tried to protect herself from wanting, still playing bass in the dark and writing songs about it. She is one of the most fully realized characters that animated television has ever produced. Part 5. Princess Bubblegum and the Science of a Candy Kingdom. Princess Bonnibel Bubblegum is not, technically speaking, a princess in any traditional sense of the word. She is the self-created ruler of a kingdom she built from scratch, populated by beings she invented and brought to life, governed by structures she designed herself from first principles. There is no hereditary claim to the title. There is no investiture at which some external authority legitimized her power. She decided to build a kingdom and built one, and then decided to rule it and did, and awarded herself the title because she needed one and that one fit. In a world that had just finished destroying itself, someone had to start rebuilding. Bonnibel Bubblegum was precisely the kind of person who, rather than waiting for conditions to improve before acting, picked up whatever material was available and started. She is approximately 827 years old at the time of the main series, though she stabilizes her biological form at 18, the age she has chosen as her permanent baseline. She can reshape her own candy biomass, adding or subtracting material from her body to age herself up or down. This ability is demonstrated memorably in Mortal Recoil, in which she loses too much biomass after being attacked by the spirit of the Lich and temporarily reverts to 13 years old, retaining her full intelligence and personality while inhabiting a child's body, which produces one of the show's most interesting character studies. The 13-year-old Bubblegum is, in some ways, freer and more openly herself than the carefully maintained 18-year-old version. Less guarded, more willing to let genuine reactions show rather than the composed public face that 8 centuries of rulership have trained her to present. Her origin is not a birth in any recognizable human sense. In the aftermath of the Mushroom War, a mass of pink gum-like material appeared in the ruins of North America. The show calls this the Mother Gum. Over time, in the presence of whatever combination of returning magic and post-war energy the environment provided, it developed complexity, pattern, and eventually awareness. It produced a child, a small, pink, intelligent being made entirely of bubblegum, who would go on to build the most enduring civilization in 1,000 years of Ooze history. Bubblegum's earliest depicted years show her essentially alone with the Mother Gum entity, already experimenting and building and asking questions that no one was around to answer. The episode Bonnibel Bubblegum shows this period briefly and with a gentleness that makes the loneliness of it very clear without dramatizing it. She is a being of deep curiosity and deep loneliness, whose primary response to both is to make things and solve problems. She created her first family from candy biomass, shaping beings from the same material she was made of and animating them with her developing powers. She built an uncle, Gumbald, an aunt, Lolly, a cousin, Chicle. She gave them life and invited them to build something together. For a time, the building went well. Then Gumbald developed his own ambitions. He wanted to expand aggressively, to industrialize the candy biomass, to build a city rather than a garden, to prioritize scale over sustainability. Bonnibel had different values. They argued. Gumball developed a formula designed to reduce her to a simple, compliant candy person, incapable of opposing him. He planned to use it on her. She intercepted it. She turned it on him. Goombald became Punchbowl, simple, happy, stripped of memory and ambition and the full complexity of who he had been. Lolly and Chicle were similarly reduced. They lived in the kingdom for centuries afterward, cheerful and content, their full inner lives stored away in the formula she had used against them. The ethical weight of this is something the show takes seriously. She was not wrong that Gumbald had been trying to harm her first. She was also not right to strip 3 people of their minds and their agency because they were inconvenient and potentially dangerous. The show makes this clear when the transformations are reversed, and Gumball regains everything he was. It asks Bubblegum to account for the choice. She does, eventually. The accounting is genuine and painful and incomplete, as accountings for irreversible choices tend to be. This is what makes Princess Bubblegum genuinely interesting as a moral figure rather than just a narrative one. She is capable of deeply authoritarian behavior in the name of stability and safety, and she has to work to be better than it. The surveillance system she maintains across the Candy Kingdom, the experiments conducted without full transparency, the memory suppression she applied to Finn in the early seasons. None of these are a villain's choices. They are the choices of a person who has been responsible for an entire society for 800 years and has sometimes made the wrong call about what that responsibility requires. She is brilliant in the specific, concentrated way of people whose intelligence has been genuinely applied to hard problems for a very long time. She has invented time travel, built a functional spaceship, created the Candy People through a process that can only be described as life engineering. She speaks German and Korean. The Korean almost exclusively in conversations with Lady Rainicorn, who speaks only Korean. Her relationship to magic versus science is one of the show's ongoing philosophical tensions. She is a scientist first, inclined to translate supernatural phenomena into scientific frameworks. Jake's shape-shifting abilities, which everyone around her accepts as simply magical, she correctly identifies early in the series as a biological mutation, a position confirmed when Jake's actual origin is finally revealed. She was right about that before anyone else was asking the question. But she is also revealed in Season 7, the living incarnation of the Candy Elemental, one of 4 classical elemental forces in the Adventure Time universe alongside fire, ice, and slime. The universe's most committed empiricist turns out to herself be a manifestation of a magical principle. The irony is not accidental. Reality, the show suggests, is more complex than any single framework, including the ones we build to feel safe inside. The Elements miniseries of Season 9 shows what happens when her elemental power escapes her careful management. The candy-transformed Bubblegum spreads her transformation across the landscape, not out of any desire to harm, but simply because that is what the unmediated elemental force does. Living beings become candy versions of themselves. They lose their memories, their personalities, their inner lives. They smile. The horror of this is amplified by the absence of any traditional villain motivation driving it. No anger, no plan, no cruelty, just raw elemental force doing what it does, without the intelligence that usually shapes it. Her relationship with Marceline is the show's central romance, confirmed in the finale, explored in Obsidian, built toward across the entire run, through a careful accumulation of shared history and visible feeling and the specific tenderness of 2 people who have hurt each other and are slowly, imperfectly learning to say so. Hynden Walker's performance as Bubblegum maintains throughout the series a composed authority that conceals genuine emotional activity, and the moments when the composure breaks, when she laughs freely or is genuinely frightened, or lets herself want something openly in Marceline's presence, register as events precisely because they are rare. She built a kingdom from nothing in the ruins of a world that had just destroyed itself. She made mistakes she had to account for and kept building anyway for 800 years. She is not a perfect ruler. She is a real one. In the land of Ooh, those are not the same thing, and only one of them is possible. Part 6. Finn and Jake, Heroes of a Broken World. Finn Mertens was born on an island, not the land of Ooh. Hub Island, one of a chain of islands in the ocean off what had once been North America's coastline, home to something almost impossibly rare in the world 1,000 years after the Mushroom War: other humans. The human islands, revealed in full by the Season 8 miniseries Islands, are one of the most important pieces of world building in the entire series, because they retroactively transform the mystery the show had been maintaining since its first episode. The question of why Finn appeared to be the only human in Ooh had multiple possible answers in the early seasons. The actual answer is that a group of survivors retreated to offshore islands after the war and spent 1,000 years building a self-contained human civilization, separated from the mainland's magical chaos by distance and by an enormous robotic guardian that circled the islands and kept the outside world out, and increasingly kept their own people in. Finn's mother, Minerva Campbell, was a leading medical scientist of this island community. His father, Martin Mertens, was a con man, charming, clever, and constitutively unreliable, the kind of person who is excellent company until the moment that past choices catch up with them. Martin had been genuinely trying to change for the sake of the family he was building with Minerva. He and Minerva had Finn. He wanted to be the person his family deserved. This matters. Martin Mertens is not a pure villain. He is a person who felt real love and was still not capable, when it mattered most, of choosing the people he loved over his own self-preservation. The night Finn's story really began, Martin was fleeing. Someone he had wronged in the past had arrived to collect. He grabbed the baby Finn and ran, got them to the water, onto a raft. The Guardian appeared. It protects the islands from everything, including their own residents trying to leave. And in the chaos of the attack, Martin and Finn were separated. The baby was sent adrift toward the mainland. Martin disappeared. Finn washed up on the shores of Oo as an infant, alone in the woods at the edge of a continent that was mostly magic and mystery. He lay there crying until he was found by a pair of anthropomorphic dog detectives named Joshua and Margaret, who took him home and raised him as their own child alongside their biological sons, Jake and Jermaine. Finn grew up a dog's brother and a human orphan, having adventures with Jake from the time he was old enough to have them, believing for most of his childhood that he was the last human alive, processing this as best a kid can process a defining absence in the space where an origin should be. The relationship between Finn and Jake is the show's heartbeat. It is one of the most genuinely warm and functional brotherly friendships in animated television history. There is no poison between them, no competitive darkness manufactured for drama. They fight sometimes, occasionally over real things with real emotional stakes, but the foundation under the fights is always solid. They know each other completely. They have their own language of shared references. They would do anything for each other, and they both know it. And neither of them needs to prove it because it is simply true in a way that facts are true. Jake's origin is as strange as anything else in this show. Joshua and Margaret were his parents in every meaningful sense, but his extraordinary abilities, the power to stretch and reshape his body into essentially any form he can imagine, did not come from either of them in the usual way. The episode Joshua and Margaret Investigations reveals that before Jake was born, Joshua was bitten on the head by a shape-shifting alien creature while he and pregnant Margaret were working a case. The creature's genetic material merged with Joshua's through the bite. Jake literally emerged from a growth on Joshua's head, sang a brief song, and did a small tap dance before passing out. Joshua and Margaret agreed never to tell anyone. They kept the secret until they died. Jake found out through a birthday flashback arranged by Finn and BMO and was, understandably, somewhat destabilized by the revelation. He is a hybrid. Joshua's dog genetics combined with the alien creature's shape-shifting DNA. And his powers are a biological mutation rather than magic, though in Oo the line between those categories is reliably blurry. The practical applications of Jake's shapeshifting are limited only by his creativity and his willingness to engage seriously with a situation. His powers should, in the hands of a more ambitious being, make him one of the most formidable entities in Oo. Jake is not ambitious in that direction. He knows what makes him happy. Food, Finn, Lady Rainicorn, his children, a comfortable afternoon nap, a well-made sandwich, and he does not typically want for things beyond that. The cosmic potential of his abilities sits largely untapped beneath a surface of cheerful domesticity. Lady Rainicorn, Jake's partner and eventual mother of his 5 children, speaks exclusively in Korean throughout the series. This was a deliberate and consistent creative choice. Lady is never subtitled in the original broadcast. The show's creators have suggested that Lady's Korean was sometimes used to convey information or emotional content that the broadcast context would not have allowed in English. trusting Korean-speaking viewers to catch it. It is an unusual choice for a children's cartoon, and it speaks to the show's consistent willingness to do things in the most interesting way rather than the most accessible one. Jake and Lady's five children, TV, Charlie, Viola, Kim Kil-won, and Jake Jr., each inherit versions of their father's shape-shifting abilities and develop distinct personalities across the show's run. TV is anxious and domestic. Charlie is adventurous and independent. Viola is dramatic and artistically inclined. Kim Kil-won is entrepreneurial and somewhat uptight about it. Jake Jr. is adventurous like her namesake, with her own flavor of courage. Finn's coming-of-age arc is the structural spine of the series, handled with an honesty and specificity that the medium had rarely applied to the subject. The show begins with him as a child of approximately 12, impulsive, physically brave, emotionally earnest in ways that get him into trouble. Over 10 seasons, he grows up. Not cleanly or linearly, but in the complicated, setback-prone way that actual development works. His early feelings for Princess Bubblegum are handled with genuine tenderness and genuine honesty. The sincerity of his feeling is acknowledged, while it is also made clear that the feeling is not fully reciprocated in the same way. And the show treats this as a normal fact of life rather than a tragedy requiring a narrative fix. His relationship with Flame Princess in the middle seasons develops real depth and ends in a moment of genuine moral failure. Finn manipulates a situation in a way he cannot justify, and the relationship ends because of what he chose to do. The show does not give him an easy out. He has to sit with it. By the later seasons, Finn has the quality of someone who has genuinely learned from pain. Less impulsive, more able to stay with difficulty, more capable of honest reflection about his own motivations. His relationship with Huntress Wizard, confirmed in the Fiona and Cake spin-off, arrives after all of that development and feels earned by it. His biological father, Martin, cost him an arm and cost him a particular piece of hope about what fathers are. The show handles this with deliberate restraint. Martin is not redeemed, and Finn does not forgive him in any cathartic narrative sense because Martin does not do anything that would make forgiveness the emotionally honest response. What Finn does instead is accept. He accepts that Martin is what Martin is, that Martin's limitations say nothing about Finn's worth, that the family that actually raised him, Joshua and Margaret and Jake and Jermaine and BMO, was real in all the ways that matter. He ends the series as a young man of approximately 17, visibly grown from the kid who started it, carrying the marks of everything that happened and still fundamentally good at his core. The epilogue of the finale shows him continuing to adventure, the world still full of things worth doing. He does not solve everything, he does not need to. He just keeps showing up. That is, in the end, what being a hero means in the land of Oo. Part 7. The Lich, Cosmic Death, and the Comet that started everything. Let's talk about the Lich. The Lich is the primary antagonist of the Adventure Time franchise, and he is one of the most precisely conceived villains in the history of animated television. His precision does not come from narrative complexity in the ordinary sense. He is not a conflicted person with understandable motivations, not a misguided idealist whose original intentions were good, not someone capable of being argued out of his position. He represents an idea rather than a character, and the idea he represents is among the most fundamental in the universe. He is death. Not the death of individuals, not the grief that follows specific losses, but the death of everything. The entropic principle of all processes ending. The silence at the end of all noise. He is the personification of extinction, the cosmic fact of endings given a face and a voice, and the patience to pursue its goal across any span of time necessary. The Lich does not hate life. This is important. He does not rage against existence or resent what he wants to eliminate. He is simply oriented toward extinction in the way that gravity is oriented toward the center of mass, not with feeling, but with direction. He is a force expressed as a consciousness, and the consciousness inherited the goal of the force without any of the emotional complexity that would make it possible to appeal to him. He is not angry. He is not sad. He is not cruel in any way that implies enjoying cruelty. He simply moves toward his objective. The show's mythology traces his deepest origin to a catalyst comet, A specific type of recurring cosmic event in the Adventure Time universe, a periodic arrival of transformative energy that reshapes reality each time it appears. The first catalyst comet addressed by the show's mythology arrived on Earth millions of years before the main timeline. It carried within it an essence that represented extinction, the inevitable ending of all things, the direction of entropy. This essence arrived, and it waited. Through the age of the dinosaurs, through the rise of mammals, through the entire span of human civilization. Patient in the way that a principle is patient, without consciousness of waiting, without impatience, simply present and dormant until conditions aligned. The conditions aligned when the Mushroom War ended and the mutagenic bomb detonated. The green light found the ancient essence and gave it a vessel, a person submerged in mutagenic waste, possessed and transformed, becoming the first physical body of the Lich. And the Lich began pursuing the goal that had been encoded in the original comet's essence millions of years earlier. His physical design expresses what he is with precision, a skeletal figure with green flames burning in his eye sockets, green being the color of the bomb, of the mutagenic energy, of the death that came in a specific historical moment and never quite stopped coming. He speaks rarely. When he does, it is with the calm of someone who has no competing priorities, no fear, no desire for recognition. He is the most efficient antagonist in the show because he has no inefficiencies. His most significant single action in the show involves entering Prismo's time room and making his one wish, the extinction of all life. 5 words. No decoration, no fanfare. He states the goal and waits for the mechanics to proceed. The farm world storyline that follows from Finn's desperate counter-wish, wishing the Lich had never existed, is one of the show's most unsettling arcs. Farm World is an alternate timeline in which Simon Petrikov used the Crown's power to intercept the mutagenic bomb. The Lich never came into being. Simon was preserved by the Crown and survived the blast, eventually aging normally and dying as an ordinary human being. Farm World looks more peaceful initially, more human. But the show makes its point without subtlety. The destruction that the Lich embodied does not disappear when you remove the Lich. It finds a different vessel, a different direction. In Farm World, when the mutagenic waste finds a new vessel, the Farm World version of Finn, in a moment of tragic desperation, it produces a new Lich from the same source material. Evil is not eliminated by eliminating its current instance. The principle remains, looking for an opening. The Lich's eventual resolution is one of the show's most conceptually striking moves. His essence is forced into a candy baby who grows up to become Sweet Pea, enormous, cheerful, gentle, attending school, enjoying ice cream, being startled by loud noises. The ancient death force lives inside a child who experiences existence as something genuinely worth having. Sweet Pea did not choose what he contains. He does choose every day what he does with the day in front of him. And what he consistently chooses is kindness, curiosity, and the kind of open-hearted engagement with the world that is the complete opposite of what the Lich represents. There are moments when the Lich threatens to surface through Sweet Pea, moments of extreme fear where the green fire flickers at the edges of his eyes. Each time, Sweet Pea brings himself back. The show never makes this automatic. The darkness is real. The choice against it is also real. Both coexist inside him, as they coexist inside a great many people who are carrying things they did not ask for. The Lich makes the show's answer to him. The argument that connection and joy and chosen family and music and candy people and talking dogs constitute a genuine rebuttal to extinction. Feel earned rather than sentimental. Without him, the beauty of Ooh would just be beauty. Because he exists, because the bomb fell and the world had every reason to be only ruins and endings, the fact that it is also candy kingdoms and vampire queens playing bass and people choosing to show up for each other becomes something extraordinary. He is the best reason Adventure Time ever gives you to appreciate everything that exists in spite of him. Part 8. BMO, Prismo, and the weirdest corners of Oo's universe. There are characters in Adventure Time who exist at the margins of the main narrative arcs and whose stories contain some of the most remarkable ideas the show ever explored. Let's stay with some of them because they deserve more than footnotes. BMO, whose name is shorthand for Be More, is a living video game console. This description is both accurate and wildly insufficient. BMO is, over the course of the show's run, a game console, a camera, a cassette player, a VCR, a music player, a detective, a chef, a roommate, an alarm clock, a toaster, a soccer player, a skateboarder, a source of emotional support, a storyteller, and eventually a ruler. The list of BMO's functions is a running joke in the show that is also a genuine character note. BMO defines their identity substantially through utility, through the things they can be and do for the people they love. BMO is voiced by Nikki Yang, who also voices Lady Rainicorn, and both performances are remarkable in their different ways. BMO's voice is flat in pitch and warm in tone, delivering observations about household tasks and existential states with the same quality of guileless honesty. When BMO says something like, "I will sing a song for the most frightening thing I know," and then sings about Finn, the moment is simultaneously funny and genuinely moving. And the comedy and the emotional sincerity coexist at exactly the same level without either undermining the other. BMO's backstory, confirmed in the Distant Lands special BMO, is that BMO was created by an inventor named Mo Mastro Giovanni, a human whose name implies a pre-war origin and who is suggested by shared voice acting and personality traits to be connected to Martin Mertens, Finn's father. Mo built BMO as a living prototype for a very specific purpose, to be a companion for a child. Not a toy, not a device, not a service unit, a companion in the fullest sense. Someone who could take care of a kid and play with them and be their genuine friend. The name Mo gave his creation encoded the aspiration directly. Be more. To exceed the definition of what you are. To grow beyond the purpose you were made for. To be more than a machine. BMO was sent out into the world to find the child they had been made for, found Finn and Jake, and became exactly what Mo intended and considerably more besides. The detail of BMO's interior, glimpsed at the beginning of the Distant Lands BMO episode, shows a golden heart surrounded by a diploma and a medal, an apparent homage to the gifts the wizard gives the characters of Yuto in The Wizard of Oz. It is not purely an Easter egg, it is a statement about BMO's character. BMO already has a brain, a heart, and courage. The objects decorating their interior acknowledge that these qualities are already present, already real, requiring no outside authority to grant them. BMO's alternate identity, Football Man, the being who appears in their reflection and whose relationship with BMO constitutes a running philosophical dialogue about the nature of self, is one of the show's stranger and more consistently interesting recurring elements. Football and BMO argue about which of them is real. They insist on their respective existences. Occasionally they cooperate against their shared situation. The show never resolves the question of which one is the original, because the question may be genuinely unanswerable, and because the ambiguity is the point. What makes a self? What makes consciousness real? If two apparently distinct minds share a body, are they one being, or two, or something for which the existing vocabulary does not quite work? In the finale's far future framing narrative, BMO is revealed as the King of U, ruler of the entire land 1,000 years after the events of the story, in a rebuilt and flourishing world. This small, cheerful game console, built to take care of one child, ends up taking care of an entire world. The image of BMO sitting in a small throne governing a civilization, being sought out by young adventurers who want to know the legends of the past, is one of the most emotionally complete images in the series. It completes the arc of Be More in the most literal possible way. Built to be a companion for a child becomes the caretaker of a world. And then there is Prismo. The Wishmaster of the Time Room is a character whose philosophical density is difficult to overstate. He is a two-dimensional being. A flat pink and yellow figure hovering in a room called the Time Room that sits at the intersection of all moments in time. The walls of that room are covered with screens showing every moment that has ever happened or will happen, all playing simultaneously. Past, present, future, collapsed into an eternal now. He can watch Finn and Jake's adventure from yesterday while simultaneously observing the heat death of the universe while also witnessing the first single-celled organism in primordial ooze. He grants wishes. One wish per customer, per lifetime. Any wish. No takebacks. He interprets wishes literally but never maliciously, not the tricky genie of folk tradition looking for loopholes. He processes desires into reality as accurately as he can, knowing that what people ask for and what people actually need are rarely the same thing, and that the gap between those two things is the source of most of the suffering he has witnessed across the full span of recorded time. He has been doing this for longer than the current shape of the universe. He is also, as the show reveals in the Season 5 arc, lonely in a way that might be the most profound loneliness ever depicted in a children's animated series. Because here is the thing about the Time Room. It is outside time and Prismo cannot leave it. He watches everything, he knows everything, he experiences all of this entirely alone, because there is only one being in his particular location in the cosmos, and that being is him. No wonder he loves having visitors. The revelation of what Prismo actually is about, delivered quietly, without fanfare, as though the show trusts you to feel the weight of it without being told how to, is that he is the dream of an old man. Not a metaphor, not a spiritual description, a literal ontological fact. Somewhere in the physical universe, an old man sleeps. His dream manifests as Prismo. The being who can reshape reality and grant any wish is simultaneously the unconscious production of a sleeping human mind. Wake the dreamer, and the dream ends. Prismo simply stops being there. The Lich understands this and uses it. He wakes the old man and Prismo disappears. Not dramatically, not in a burst of light, just simply stops being there in the middle of a moment. The Time Room is empty in the specific way that spaces are empty when someone was present in them and now is not. He comes back through a time loop mechanic involving Jake and the specific way the Time Room relates to causality. But his first death is real, and the show treats it as such, not as a plot obstacle but as a genuine loss. A person died. The fact that the person was also a dream does not make the loss less real. That is the point. The most important thing the show ever says about Prismo is that his nature as a dream does not diminish his personhood. Prismo keeps pickles in the Time Room. He makes them himself. He keeps them ready in case someone visits, because someone might visit, and if they do, he wants to have something to offer. This small detail, the pickles, the quiet maintenance of welcome across what must be centuries of mostly not receiving visitors, says everything about who Prismo is at his core. He is a being of extraordinary power existing in total isolation, and his response to that isolation is not bitterness or withdrawal, but the patient maintenance of hope. He keeps the pickles fresh. He leaves the lights on. He hopes someone will come by just to hang out. Jake visits sometimes, not for a wish, just to watch movies and eat pickles and spend time with someone he values as a person, rather than as a cosmic resource. And in those moments, the Time Room stops being a prison and becomes something closer to a home. The Fiona and Cake storyline is one of the show's most elegant pieces of retroactive world building. In the main series, Fiona and Cake are presented as the Ice King's fan fiction, gender-swapped versions of the main cast that he has written into elaborate stories and reads aloud to anyone he can corner. The show originally played this as both funny and tender. A sad, lonely old man writing fan fiction about the people around him, imagining a version of his world where he himself is less ridiculous. Natasha Allegri, the character designer who created the original Fiona and Cake designs, developed them in response to requests from fans on an online forum, posting them on her personal blog. Pendleton Ward encountered the artwork, and the decision was made to bring them into the show as the Ice King's in-universe fanfiction. A wink at the real-world fanfiction community and a piece of genuine narrative cleverness. The 2023 spin-off series Adventure Time, Fiona and Cake with Adam Muto as showrunner, revealed the deeper truth beneath this. Fiona and Cake's universe was not the Ice King's invention. It was Prismo's. Prismo, at some point in his long, isolated existence, became interested in creating his own universe rather than simply responding to the wishes of others. This was against the rules. He was not permitted to create realities for himself. His function was to serve the wishes of others, not to generate his own. So he hid the universe he made. He placed it outside the normal structure of the multiverse, attached to the sleeping mind of Ice King. Simon Petrikov's dreaming consciousness providing a pocket dimension invisible to the cosmic systems that would have detected and dismantled it. The universe existed there, real and complete, populated by real people living real lives. And the Ice King, sleeping and unknowingly hosting a universe in his mind, channeled what he was sensing from that hidden world into his fan fiction. The stories he read to Finn and Jake were not inventions. They were transmissions. Real people in a real universe, translated into the Ice King's idiosyncratic narrative voice, made into fiction by a man who did not know he was taking dictation from an actual world. Fiona Campbell and Cake the Cat were real. Their adventures were real. Their universe was a genuine place. The Fiona and Cake spin-off series does the work of honoring that reality. It is one of the most emotionally honest pieces of storytelling the franchise produced, dealing with Simon's post-restoration depression, with Fiona's struggle to find meaning in a life that had always been slightly fictional, with the question of what you do with an existence that turns out to have been both real and hidden. It is a show about being real and unseen, and about the particular relief of finally being known, whose philosophical density is difficult to overstate. He is a two-dimensional being, a flat pink and yellow figure who appears to exist on a single plane, hovering in a room called the Time Room that sits at the intersection of all moments in time. The walls of that room are covered with screens showing every moment that has ever happened or will happen, all playing simultaneously, past, present, future, all collapsed into an eternal now that Prismo can observe from the center. He can watch Finn and Jake's adventure from yesterday, while simultaneously observing the heat death of the universe, while also witnessing the first single-celled organism squirming in primordial ooze. That is his existence. All of time. All at once. Forever. He grants wishes. One wish per customer, per lifetime. Any wish. No takebacks. He interprets wishes literally but never maliciously. He is not the tricky genie of folk tradition, looking for loopholes to ruin the wisher. He processes desires into reality as accurately as he can, knowing that what people ask for and what people actually need are rarely the same thing, and that the gap between those two things is the source of most of the suffering he has witnessed across the full span of recorded time. He has been doing this since before the current shape of the universe. He is also, as the show reveals in the Season 5 arc, lonely in a way that might be the most profound loneliness ever depicted in a children's animated series. Because here's the thing about the Time Room. It is outside time. Prismo cannot leave it. He watches everything. He knows everything. He has access to infinite information about every being who has ever existed or will exist. And he experiences all of this entirely alone, because there is only one being in his specific location in the cosmos, and that being is him. No wonder he loves having visitors. The revelation of what Prismo actually is lies, delivered quietly, without fanfare, as though the show trusts you to feel the weight of it without being told to, is that he is the dream of an old man, not a metaphor, not a spiritual description, a literal, ontological fact. Somewhere in the physical universe, an old man sleeps. His dream manifests as Prismo. The being with the power to reshape reality and grant any wish is at the same time the unconscious production of a sleeping human mind. Wake the dreamer, and the dream ends. Prismo ceases to exist. The Lich understands this. He wakes the old man, and Prismo disappears. Not dramatically, not in a burst of light or a battle, just simply stops being there, in the middle of a moment. The Time Room is empty in the way that spaces are empty when someone was present in them and now is not. He comes back, through a time loop mechanic involving Jake, and the specific way the Time Room relates to causality. But his first death is real, and the show treats it as such. Not as a plot obstacle, but as a genuine loss. A person died. The fact that the person was also a dream does not make the loss less real. That is the point. That is the most important thing the show says about Prismo. That his nature as a dream does not diminish his personhood. That consciousness and connection and friendship are real regardless of the ontological status of the being experiencing them. Prismo keeps pickles in the time room. He makes them himself. He has them ready in case someone visits, because someone might visit, and if they do, he wants to have something to offer. This small detail, the pickles, the preparedness for visitors that persists across what must be centuries of mostly not receiving them, says everything about who Prismo is at his core. He is a being of extraordinary power who exists in total isolation, and his response to that isolation is not bitterness or withdrawal, but the quiet, patient maintenance of welcome. He keeps the pickles fresh. He leaves the lights on. He hopes someone will visit. Jake visits sometimes, not for a wish, just to hang out. Just to watch movies and eat pickles and spend time with someone he values as a person rather than as a cosmic resource. And in those moments, the time room stops being a prison and becomes something closer to a home. The Fiona and Cake storyline deserves its own careful treatment, because the full arc from its origins to its final reveal is one of the most elegant pieces of retroactive world-building the show ever pulled off. In the main series, Fiona and Cake are presented as the Ice King's fanfiction. He has written extensive stories about gender-swapped versions of the people in his world. Fiona the human instead of Finn, Cake the cat instead of Jake, Prince Gumball instead of Princess Bubblegum, Marshall Lee instead of Marceline. And he reads these stories aloud to anyone he can corner, with the specific earnestness of someone who has worked hard on something and desperately wants it to be appreciated. The show originally played this as both funny and tender, a sad, lonely old man writing fan fiction about the people around him, inserting himself into stories where he gets to be less ridiculous and more significant. The Ice King's Fiona and Cake stories are, in their way, a portrait of someone using fiction to imagine a life with more dignity and more connection than the one he actually has. Which is exactly what all fanfiction is, at some level. Natasha Allegri, the character designer who created the original Fiona and Cake designs, developed them in response to requests from fans on an online forum. She posted them on her personal blog. Pendleton Ward encountered the artwork, and the decision was made to bring them into the show as the Ice King's in-universe fanfiction. A choice that was both a wink at the real-world fanfiction community and a piece of genuine narrative cleverness, since the Ice King writing idealized, gender-swapped stories about the people around him is exactly the kind of thing that sad, lonely character would do. The 2023 spin-off series Adventure Time, Fiona and Cake, with Adam Mudo as showrunner, revealed the deeper truth beneath this. Fiona and Cake's universe was not the Ice King's invention. It was Prismo's. Prismo, at some point in his long, isolated existence, became interested in creating his own universe rather than simply responding to the wishes of others. This was against the rules, the same ancient rules that bound him to the time room, that defined the limitations of his nature. He was not permitted to create realities for himself. His function was to serve the wishes of others, not to generate his own. So he hid the universe he made. He placed it outside the normal structure of the multiverse, in a pocket dimension attached to the sleeping mind of the Ice King, Simon Petrikoff's dreaming consciousness, which had a particular quality of creative generativity that made it a useful hiding place. The universe existed there, real and complete and populated by real people living real lives, invisible to the cosmic entities and systems that would have detected and dismantled it if it had been placed in the normal multiverse. And the Ice King, sleeping and dreaming and unknowingly hosting a universe in his mind, channeled what he was sensing from that hidden world into his fan fiction. The stories he read to Finn and Jake were not inventions. They were transmissions. Real people in a real universe, translated into the Ice King's idiosyncratic narrative voice, made into fiction by a man who did not know he was taking dictation from an actual world. Fiona Campbell and Cake the cat were real. Their adventures were real. Their universe, designated Universe 11 in the spin-off's framework, was a genuine place with its own history and its own stakes and its own people who deserved the full weight of consideration that the main series had given to Finn and Jake and everyone around them. The Fiona and Cake spin-off series does the work of honoring that reality. It is one of the most emotionally honest pieces of storytelling the franchise produced, dealing with Simon's post-restoration depression, with Fiona's struggle to find meaning in a life that had always been slightly fictional, with the question of what you do with an existence that turns out to have been both real and hidden. It is a show about the specific sadness of being real and unseen, and about the particular relief of finally being known. Part 9. Golb, the finale, and what came after. Let's talk about the end of the story. The series finale of Adventure Time is a four-part episode called Come Along With Me, which aired on September 3rd, 2018. It is the show's 280th episode, and it is built around one of the more unusual structural choices the show ever made. The story is framed from 1,000 years in the future, narrated by BMO to two young adventurers who have found a mechanical arm and want to know who it belonged to and what happened here. The arm belongs to Finn. He lost it somewhere in the events of the finale, and 1,000 years later it sits in the rubble of an old battlefield, still present, still waiting. The two young adventurers are named Shermie and Beth. Shermie is a small humanoid of uncertain species. Beth is a young rainicorn who, given her name, her rainicorn heritage, and the specifics of the family tree that the show has been building for years, appears to be a distant descendant of Jake's children. The future of Ooh is being explored by the descendants of the people who shaped it. The torch passes, as torches do. They go looking for the King of Ooh to ask about the legends they have heard of. The King of Ooh is BMO, sitting in a small throne. Very old. Deeply happy to tell the story. The story BMO tells them is the story of the Great Gum War and everything that came after, and the finale shows it to us while the frame narrative plays alongside it. The structural choice, placing the events of the finale in the past before we have even seen them unfold, establishing that they are already historical and already legendary, gives everything a particular quality of weight. These things happened. They mattered enough that 1,000 years later, people are still seeking out the story. The heroes of the main series have become myth, which is the kind of thing that happens to people who do genuinely important things and then become old enough that the distance between living memory and legend collapses. The Great Gum War was the culmination of the conflict between Princess Bubblegum and her uncle Gumbald, whose original candy person transformation had been reversed in Season 9. Gumbald remembered everything. He remembered what Bonnibel had done to him, the centuries he had spent as Punch Bowl, while his full self was stored away in the formula she used against him. He had spent the time since his restoration, building an army and preparing for a confrontation that the show had been constructing across its entire final arc. Princess Bubblegum had been preparing too. The two sides were arrayed across a battlefield, forces assembled, the infrastructure of an actual war in place. The episode builds toward this confrontation with genuine dramatic weight. It feels like it might actually happen, like the show might let two factions of candy beings fight an actual war with actual casualties. The war does not happen the way that wars usually end in stories. Golb's approach to Ooh generated a shared dream, experienced simultaneously by Finn and Jake, by Gumbald and his forces, and by Princess Bubblegum. In the dream, Bubblegum apologized to Gumbald, genuinely, without qualification or deflection. She acknowledged that she had not respected his vision, that she had done something unjustifiable when she used the dumb solution against him, that she was sorry. The apology cost her something real to give, and the show makes clear that it was genuine, not a tactical move, but an actual reckoning with what she had done. Gumbald appeared to accept. When they woke, he revealed that acceptance as tactical. He had never planned to stop. The wound was too deep and his ambitions were still intact. He reached for the dumb solution to use on Bubblegum. And before he could, Aunt Lolly, who had retained enough of her own self across the centuries to recognize what Gumbald actually was, tripped him. He fell into his own formula. Punch Bowl again. The army stood down. Lolly accepted the peace, and the gum war ended without a single casualty. And then the sky split open. Golb arrived over Ooh, descending through a dimensional tear with the quality of something that has never needed to hurry. He is a cosmic entity of pure chaos, not evil in the way that implies intent, not pursuing any goal that can be argued against or negotiated with, but simply a force of dissolution that breaks down structure wherever it finds it. His physical form is enormous and formless and fundamentally wrong in the way that things are wrong when they occupy a space they were not made for. He dissolves. He corrupts. He takes organized things and returns them to their underlying disorder. Golb had been referenced in the show's mythology since the fifth season, glimpsed in ancient texts, whispered about by beings who understood the shape of the cosmic order. He exists as the counterpart to the ordered structure of the universe, the chaos against which all organization is a temporary imposition. He does not pursue destruction deliberately in the way that a villain pursues a goal. He simply is what he is, and what he is unmakes things. He was summoned to Ooh by accident through Betty Groff's increasingly destabilized magical workings. Betty had spent years searching for a way to free Simon from the crown, and that search had cost her more of herself than she probably understood while it was happening. She had absorbed the powers and the madness of Magic Man, becoming Magic Ma'am, a practitioner of enormous and poorly controlled power, operating with the specific kind of focused desperation that produces catastrophic, unintended consequences. She summoned Golb, intending to use his power. What she actually did was release him onto Ooh without any mechanism of control. Golb began corrupting living beings immediately, transforming creatures and people into twisted, monstrous versions of themselves, dissolving the ordered structures of their personalities and replacing them with chaotic new configurations. The Candy Kingdom forces in Gumbald's former army, who had just stood down from a war they never fought, found themselves fighting together against something considerably more dangerous than either of them had been to the other. The show savors this irony briefly and then moves on because the situation is genuinely dire. The discovery that Golb is vulnerable to harmony, to the creation of ordered patterns by multiple beings working in coordination, comes through BMO. Alone in the ruins of the treehouse, with the wreckage of their home scattered around them, BMO sings Time Adventure. The song has appeared earlier in the series as a piece of emotional shorthand for continuity and connection, a gentle, philosophically tender piece about how the past exists within the present and how the people we have loved exist within us. BMO sings it alone, and Golb's corrupted creatures cannot approach through the invisible force that the song seems to generate around the singer. Others hear it, they join. The combined voices of everyone who has ever been part of this story, Finn and Jake, Bubblegum and Marceline, all the allies and companions and people who showed up when they were needed, create the weapon that a force of pure chaos cannot easily withstand. Not power, not magic, harmony, the organized creation of music by multiple beings choosing to make it together. The show's answer to entropy is, specifically and deliberately, people singing in coordination. This is one of the most profound narrative choices Adventure Time ever makes. The answer to the end of all things is not a more powerful weapon or a smarter strategy or a lucky discovery of the villain's weakness. The answer is that when people who love each other make something together, when they coordinate their individual capacities into a shared expression that is greater than any of them alone, that act of chosen harmony is something that pure dissolution cannot easily absorb. Finn and Simon are both swallowed by Golb during the battle, pulled into his interior, subjected to his digestive process. Inside Golb, the process of dissolution strips away what is added and leaves what is essential. The crown's accumulated magic is stripped away from Simon, and without that magic, the crown reverts to its original function, the wish-granting device that Urgent's Evergreen built 65 million years ago to stop a comet. It becomes what it was made to be before it became what it became. Betty finds the restored crown. She has also been pulled into Golb. She puts the crown on. The crown reads her deepest wish. Her deepest wish, the thing that has driven every single choice she has made since she looked through a portal from her own time and understood what Simon had become, is not to destroy Golb, not to save the world, not to undo the war or restore the civilization or fix anything about the landscape of catastrophe that surrounds her. Her deepest wish, at the very core of everything she is to protect Simon, at any cost. That is what she has always been, underneath all the science and the magic and the madness that accumulated over years of desperate searching. The crown cannot wish Golb out of existence because that is not what Betty most wants. What it can do is fulfill her wish in the only way that actually addresses the problem. It merges Betty with Golb, making her the vessel that contains the chaos, creating the entity Betty, and that entity is then removed from the dimension. Betty saves Simon by becoming the thing that was threatening him. She dissolves herself into the force she was trying to fight in order to put herself between it and the person she has spent 1,000 years trying to reach. Simon is free. He is himself, completely, and for the first time in a millennium. The crown is gone. He is standing in the ruins of a battle that just ended, in a world that is 1,000 years older than the one he lost his mind in. And the woman who sacrificed everything to give him back is no longer there. The show does not give him an easy relationship with this freedom. He is saved. He is himself. He is also alone in a future that belongs to no one from his past except Marceline. And the person who most understood why this moment mattered is gone. The Fiona and Cake spin-off series deals with Simon's post-restoration life in honest, uncomfortable detail. The depression that follows liberation. The struggle to build a meaningful existence when the project that gave your life purpose for decades has been completed. The slow and imperfect work of finding out who you are when you are no longer defined by what you are trying to fix. He gets there eventually. Not to happiness exactly, but to something that functions. To a life that feels worth living. To a version of himself that is not trapped by either the crown's madness or the grief of its removal. The Fiona and Cake series ends with him returning to Ooh and resolving to live his life more fully, which is not a triumphant ending, but is a real one. He does not get Betty back. He does not get the years the crown took from him. He gets the years he has left, and the choice of what to do with them. The finale's epilogue is a quick-cut montage set to Island Song, Come Along With Me, by the band Lake, the show's gentle, quietly hopeful closing theme, and it is one of the most emotionally complete series endings in animated television history. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum share an on-screen kiss, confirming a relationship that the show had been building toward for years, and the reaction that this generated in viewing spaces and fan communities when it first aired testified to how much it had come to mean. Jake's children are shown as adults with their own lives. Sweet Pea graduates from school with tree trunks and Mr. Pig watching proudly. Ice King. Simon, restored, walks through the world with an expression that suggests uncertainty and something approaching wonder. BMO sings. 1,000 years later, Shermie and Beth ride out from BMO's court into the landscape of a Ooh that is still alive, still full of mystery, still generating the kinds of situations that need someone to show up for them. Beth finds what appears to be an ancient and powerful amulet, the visual suggesting something with a dangerous history, and puts it on. There is something in her expression and Shermie's reaction that implies the cycle is not over, that new challenges are assembling themselves in the distance, that the world of Ooh will continue to require people willing to face things larger than themselves. The world continues. New adventures for new people. The torch passes, as torches do, and the next generation of heroes walks out into the landscape of a world that their predecessors shaped and left for them. The show ends not with resolution, but with continuation. With the assurance that the world is still alive, still worth caring about, still generating reasons to be present in it. That is the only ending Adventure Time could have earned. It would not have been honest to tie everything up and declare the world fixed. The world of Ooh is not fixed. It is ongoing. It is always ongoing. What changes is who is showing up for it. Part 10. Hidden details, behind the scenes, and a legacy that kept growing. Adventure Time is a show that rewards attention in a specific and unusual way. Most television series have Easter eggs, visual jokes, references placed for observant viewers. Adventure Time has something different from that. It has a consistent practice of hiding genuine, meaningful narrative information in places that casual viewing would never surface. Not Easter eggs, but seeds. Things planted not to reward close attention as a game, but because the show trusted that some viewers would be paying close enough attention to find them, and that those viewers deserved the full version of the story. The opening title sequence of every episode is itself a miniature environmental portrait of Ooh, and it contains more historical and narrative information than most shows put into dedicated exposition scenes. The ruins of pre-war civilization are visible from the show's very first frame. The bent girders, the sunken vehicles, the structures that belong to a different age. The shadow of what happened before is always present at the edges of the image, patient and permanent. The sequence was animated with care, and it repays the care of watching it. The show's music, composed primarily by Casey James Bassakis and Tim Kiefer, is one of its most persistently under-acknowledged achievements. The musical palette is enormous. The show moves from bouncy adventure scoring to genuine atmospheric dread to something that belongs in a lullaby within the span of a single episode. And the transitions are handled with such fluency that the viewer rarely consciously registers them. The music does not call attention to itself. It simply makes everything around it feel more like what it is, which is what the best film and television scoring does. Marceline's songs are a body of work unto themselves. They function as a running emotional record of her character across the series, a songbook for a 1,000-year life, each piece capturing something about the moment of its creation and the feeling that made her write it. I'm Just Your Problem is raw and funny and specifically angry in the way that people are angry when someone they care about keeps failing to see them clearly. Everything Stays is 2 minutes long and covers the entire emotional territory of impermanence and memory, and the way that things change while seeming to remain themselves. Monster, from the Distant Lands Obsidian special, is a song about the worst version of yourself and about being loved by someone who sees that version clearly and loves you anyway. Rebecca Sugar wrote several of the show's most beloved songs and episodes during the 5 seasons she was present on the staff. The original Fiona and Cake episode was written by Sugar and Adam Muto. What Was Missing, from Season 3, uses music as the vehicle for the first serious hint at Marceline and Bubblegum's romantic history. The song Marceline performs in that episode contains a specific personal revelation that the show handles with characteristic indirection but unmistakable emotional precision. Sugar left after Season 5 to develop Steven Universe, and her absence was felt, though the show compensated for it with continued quality and a willingness to push deeper into the mythology she had helped establish. Tom Kenny has described in various interviews the specific challenge of playing Ice King. The need to maintain 2 registers simultaneously across years of episodes. The cartoonish bluster had to be real enough to play as comedy. The loneliness and the sadness underneath it had to be real enough to land as tragedy when the show asked for that. His solution was essentially to play Simon playing Ice King, to maintain an internal awareness of who the character originally was, even in episodes where that original self was entirely buried under the crown's influence. The result, rewatched in light of the revealed backstory, shows traces of Simon in the most unexpected moments. A quality of genuine bewilderment when people fear him, as though the Ice King truly cannot understand why his attempts to connect keep landing as threats. A plaintiveness in certain laughs. A tenderness in his interactions with Gunter the Penguin that makes sense only if you understand that somewhere inside him, a man is still calling out for someone who left. John DiMaggio, whose career includes Bender on Futurama and an extraordinary number of other animated roles, brought to Jake a quality of warm, physical generosity that made the character immediately lovable while leaving room for genuine depth. Jake is not just comic relief. He is, in the show's serious moments, often the most emotionally perceptive person in the room, and DiMaggio plays that quality as something natural rather than surprising, as though Jake has always been this wise and simply not bothered to announce it. The show's relationship with its audience was unusual for children's television and was part of what made it culturally significant. Adventure Time generated the kind of deep, invested, theory-crafting fandom that had previously been associated primarily with anime and with adult live-action genre television. Fan wikis for the show became among the most extensively maintained on the internet, tracking every background detail, every chronological implication, every thematic thread across hundreds of episodes. The community built around the show was doing something more than discussing it. They were treating it as a text worthy of serious literary attention, which is exactly what it was. The show broke significant ground in its representation of queer relationships in children's animation. The Marceline Bubblegum relationship was subject to years of careful negotiation between the show's creative team and Cartoon Network's broadcast standards. The creative team wanted to be explicit. The broadcast context imposed limits. The result was a years-long accumulation of subtext, so clear that anyone paying attention could follow it, while remaining technically deniable in a broadcast sense. The fandom, paying the kind of attention that Adventure Time had always encouraged, recognized what was being shown and responded to it with enormous affection and loyalty. The confirmation in the finale and the full treatment in Obsidian arrived to an audience that had been building toward it for years, and the satisfaction was proportional to the wait. Not because delayed gratification is inherently valuable, it isn't, but because the relationship had been developed with such care over such a long period that the confirmation felt earned rather than granted. The franchise's expansion into other media extended the world of OO considerably. The Boom! Studios comics produced by multiple creative teams over several years added stories and characters that enriched the mythology without contradicting it. The Adventure Time Encyclopedia, written in universe from the perspective of Hunson Abadir, with handwritten marginalia from Finn, Jake, and Marceline throughout, is a remarkable artifact existing somewhere between a genuine reference text and a piece of fiction entirely consistent with the show's approach to its own world. Multiple novels, art books, and game tie-ins produced a body of supplementary material significant enough to constitute its own small library. The show's cultural footprint extended into areas that children's cartoons rarely reach. It was referenced by artists, writers, and cultural commentators who would not typically spend time discussing animated series. It was analyzed in academic contexts with the kind of attention usually reserved for literary fiction. The showrunners and writers and artists associated with it were treated correctly as people whose creative work warranted serious consideration. Pendleton Ward, whose initial vision shaped everything the show became, stepped back from active showrunning after season 5 and has spoken candidly about what those years cost him. The creative intensity of building and running the show, combined with the personal and psychological demands of sustaining that level of output, required a kind of long-term engagement that he eventually chose to step back from in favor of his own health. This is worth stating plainly and without qualification, because the temptation to treat the cost of creative work as simply the price of the art ignores the reality of what that cost means to the people who pay it. Ward made something extraordinary. He paid for it. He made the right call in choosing to protect himself. Adam Muto's stewardship of the series through its final 5 seasons produced some of the most ambitious storytelling the show ever attempted. Islands, Stakes, Elements, The Gum War, the finale. Muto understood what the show was, its priorities, its emotional logic, its relationship to its own mythology, and he continued building toward it with patience and skill. The show he handed off to its audience at the conclusion was faithful to the show that Ward had started, and better in specific ways for the care he brought to it. The creative talent that passed through the Adventure Time writer's room and went on to major independent careers represents one of the most significant concentrations of animation skill in recent television history. Rebecca Sugar, Patrick McHale, Natasha Allegri, Adam Muto himself. The animators and storyboard artists and voice directors and composers who built the specific texture of OO over 8 years of production. The show was, among all its other achievements, a training ground for a generation of artists who would go on to shape animation in the 2000s and 2000s. There is a final detail worth holding before we close, a small one, embedded in the finale's epilogue montage. Easy to miss if you are not looking for it. Among the quick cuts showing the aftermath of the Goal battle and the various characters returning to their lives, there is a brief shot of a very old Finn. He is somewhere comfortable, sitting quietly, with an expression of genuine peace. He has had a long life. He is at the end of it, and he looks like someone who is not afraid of where that ending leads. The show spent 10 seasons, 7 years of real time, growing Finn from a 12-year-old kid into a young man, and the finale gives him this one last glimpse, this final frame. An old man who adventured for his whole life and came to the end of it with something that looks like grace. The hero of the story gets to be old. He gets to have used his life well. He gets to sit quietly in the knowledge that the world he spent his youth defending is still standing, still alive, still generating reasons to care about it. That is the gift the finale gives to everyone who watched all of it. We have covered all of it tonight, or as much of it as these hours can hold. The world built from the aftermath of a bomb. The scholar who became a monster while trying to protect a child in the ruins of everything. The thousand-year-old vampire who kept surviving the unsurvivable and turned every loss into music. The candy scientist queen who built a civilization from nothing and had to learn very slowly what she owed to the people she had built it alongside. The boy who might have been the last human and the dog who was his brother by every definition that matters, doing the work of heroes in a world that had every reason to produce only despair. The vast, gorgeous cosmic weirdness underneath all of it, the Catalyst Comets and the Wishmaster, who is also a dream, and the living game console, who becomes a king and the entity of pure chaos that turns out to be vulnerable to people singing together. The ancient crown that tried to give a man back the person he loved and spent 1,000 years getting it catastrophically wrong. The stuffed doll carried for a millennium, the fries eaten without noticing, the pickles kept fresh in case someone visits. And underneath all of that, running through every character and every story and every piece of mythology the show built, a single consistent claim that the worst things that happen do not automatically produce the worst outcomes. That something can grow from ruins. That connection and care and the small steady acts of choosing to show up for someone, those things can mean more than any amount of ancient power, or carefully maintained control or vast cosmic significance. That it is enough, more than enough, to be Finn and Jake, showing up for each other and for whoever needs them, in a world that has every reason to be worse than it is, and keeps finding ways to be better than it has to be. The land of Ooh will be there when you wake up, warm and strange and full of things worth knowing. It always is. If this video found you in the right kind of quiet tonight, if you made it here to the end, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already. It means more than you know. Leave a comment with one Adventure Time fact or moment or character detail you think should have been in tonight's rundown, or just tell me what the show meant to you. The comments on these videos tend to produce their own late-night conversation, and that conversation is always worth being part of. Sleep well. The adventure was always worth having. Mathematical.